So I'm asking before, how is it that you can overcome death? Because you're probably right. It's probably going to happen to all of us. And it's probably going to happen to us at a time when we least expect it. Just as you're walking down the street on some idle Tuesday or whatever, where you'll get a phone call from your doctor and they'll tell you that the results came back. It's things like that. And oftentimes you'll find, especially with old people, if you talk to them, most of them are, if it was true that it's better to just pass off, they would. But we can learn something from old people. They keep taking the medications. They keep going to the doctor. They keep doing why? Because that gives them something to overcome. It gives them a problem to overcome. It helps to build the personality, but it teaches the rest of us something, which is that life is worth living. It's good to live. Now the question is, what do you fill it with, of course, because not all life is equal. If you're filling the world with ugliness, of course, it's not the best thing to do. Not even close to the best thing to do. It's probably the worst thing to do. Well, I suppose there are ways to figuratively overcome death, but there are also some ways to literally overcome death. And again, we have some people who are working on it right now really, really hard. I happen to know somebody. When we're talking about what it is for you to be you, I think we touched on this a lot last time. You are this collection of experiences and psychological states over time. You're a mind. And so the part of you that has to die is the physical part of your body. The physical part of you, because it's made up of physical matter. All physical matter decays. Now, there are things that we can do to prolong it. So for example, we have people who are working in regenerative sciences right now who think that by the time that you guys are adults, and certainly by the time you guys have kids, that we'll be able to extend the human body for hundreds of years just by regenerating cells. Stem cells offer a possibility towards that, at least the opening science of it. So I guess I wonder, how many of you guys would want to live to be 500 or 1,000 or even 2,000 years old? No, why not?
I don't think I want to live that long.
Jeez, why not?
What would you even do for 2,000 years?
Everything, 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, but then what if everybody around you dies and you're just there? Like you have to go through so much pain.
And what happens to you when you go through a bunch of pain?
You just change it like this. But I guess change is good in some ways.
Like everything else, change is good in some ways, it's terrible in others. Pain is good in some ways, it's terrible in most other ways. But yeah, we know that life is suffering, this is true. But we also know that life is so much more, also than just suffering. Think about what you would do if you had, 1,000 years instead of 100. And if it's true that is it better to just kind of pass on gracefully, why are so many people trying really, really hard not to? I was watching, maybe you guys see that thing on Netflix, it's about Vince McMahon and the WWE, the wrestling thing. I had a friend who was talking about it, so I watched it. And this is a guy who's a billionaire, and he owns this big corporation. And as they're interviewing him, he's got to be in his 60s by now. His face is just like frozen because he's had all kinds of injections and things in his face. And I think to him, he probably thinks he looks good, rather than just getting old gracefully. And there are people who inject all kinds of things in their bodies trying to continue to look young. There are people who take all kinds of medications to try to prolong their life. If it's true that death is just something that's natural to us and we should just go off into it, why do we spend billions and billions of dollars every year trying to look younger and trying to last just a little bit longer? And that's because there's something that we understand as we get older, which is that it's better to be alive than it is to be dead. Yes, it's true that when you pass, all of your loved ones go away. Did I ever show you guys that video of it was an animated video, the first person to live forever, I think it was called, or something like that? I'll show you guys that video today, since we'll have some time. You'll see. But I mean, think about what you do if you were going to live forever, or if you were to live to be 1,000 years old, or if it's just to be 500 years old. Now, what I mean is this. if you had, let's say you had $10 billion, what would you do with that money? And I guess the answer to that question would be everything. But then how valuable would anything be to you? And if you have to work every day, if any of you, do any of you guys have a car yet? No, that's right. When you buy your first car, it's probably going to be a piece of shit. But you know what? It's going to be your piece of shit. Because you'll work for it for very little money. You'll save up, you'll save up, you'll save up, you'll save up, and then you'll buy it. And then you'll become really resourceful probably. Because your car's going to break down and you're going to have to fix it in weird ways because you won't be able to afford to fix it. And it's a piece of crap, and you'll do something silly like put really expensive rims on it or something, or put a really expensive stereo in it. A friend of mine had a car like that, and I was telling him, dude, I know how you can double the value of your car, just like that. So how? I said, just fill it up with gas. Because the car was such a piece of crap, it wasn't worth anything. If you put $30 in gas in it, you just doubled the value of that car. But as you pointed out, it's my piece of crap. And if anyone doesn't like it, you can get out and walk. But you appreciate it. You appreciate it because you earned it, you worked for it. Now, imagine if you had a different McLaren for every day of the week. And you might be like, dude, that'd be sick. For how long though? For a month, 2 months, a year? I'll just go on vacation. Where? Everywhere. Such as, you can only go to Paris so many times. You can only go to Cairo so many times. And eventually, over time, things become so easy, and I mean that easy, that life starts to lose its meaning. Life's meaning and purpose reveals itself through the struggles that we endure and overcome. This is why responsibility is such a big deal. To take on responsibility. We shun it a lot of times. We just think like, oh, I don't want responsibility, it's too many problems. But those are the problems that give your life meaning. It isn't just living in the problems, but it's the overcoming of problems. And this is why a lot of times, think about a lot of the problems in our lives. A lot of times we give ourselves problems. It's not that every problem in our life is our fault. That's not true, but so many of the problems in our lives are there because of us doing the wrong thing. And so often, it's so clearly it was the wrong thing to do. So then why do we do it? Because it's interesting, it's exciting. Like people say, I hate drama, but they always seem to find themselves around drama. Why? Because drama is interesting, it is exciting, it's a problem, it's a thing to overcome. And that's what gives us meaning and purpose. Now, that's why suffering is the root of all of that. Just saying before, you've got this tree, let's say, if you remember from before, that suffering kind of feeds into that personality that you become, but it has everything to do with how you choose to respond to that suffering. And it's a completely valid question, by the way. Yes, life is suffering, but does it have to be so full of suffering? And at some point you hit so much and you're just like, okay, I've grown. Do I need to keep growing even more after this? And so it can beg this question if you get to working through your life, so it just seems like every day there's more problems and more problems and more problems, and then you get to the end of all of it, and then you die. As people used to say, life is a bitch and then you die. That's a really dark way of looking at the world. And it's an incredibly dark way of seeing the world that's emerging right now. Like, for example, if I were to ask you guys, how many of you in here want to have children someday? And you have to raise your hands if you don't want to, but there are more and more and more people who don't want to have kids. And they're saying, why? Oh, because look how messed up the world is. Listen, the desire to have children is a belief and a trust in the future. If you believe that the world has a good future to it, you want to have children. And then that becomes a big part of maturity, growing beyond your own desires and living for somebody else and taking responsibility for somebody else and then building them up and putting them out into the world. There are people who are just completely like, I never want to have children, never going to do it, never going to do it. And then think about how it is that they live. And I'm not saying they live badly. I'm just saying, look at how they live. A lot of it is like living for themselves. And you'll find that very oftentimes they'll brag about it. No kids, I'm free, I can do whatever I want to do. Good. Yeah, because I can do whatever I want, no tethers, I can do whatever I want to do. Good for you. Yeah, man, no kids to hold me down. I heard you the first 2 times. In other words, oftentimes there's this like bragging of trying to almost convince themselves that this is the best way to live. So I'm asking before, how is it that you can overcome death? Because you're probably right. It's probably going to happen to all of us. And it's probably going to happen to us at a time when we least expect it. Just as you're walking down the street on some idle Tuesday or whatever, where you'll get a phone call from your doctor and they'll tell you that the results came back. It's things like that. And oftentimes you'll find, especially with old people, if you talk to them, most of them are, if it was true that it's better to just pass off, they would. But we can learn something from old people. They keep taking the medications. They keep going to the doctor. They keep doing why? Because that gives them something to overcome. It gives them a problem to overcome. It helps to build the personality, but it teaches the rest of us something, which is that life is worth living. It's good to live. Now the question is, what do you fill it with, of course, because not all life is equal. You know, if you're filling the world with ugliness, of course, it's not the best thing to do. It's not even close to the best thing to do. It's probably the worst thing to do. But as Becker points out, not necessarily here, but he points out elsewhere, so much of our life is geared towards that desire to overcome death. Why do we have children? Well, because we believe in a future. And we want the future to be filled with people. And we want the future to be filled with people who somehow reflect us. The fact that we were here at one point. I think it was in this class I was talking about an ancient battlefield that was discovered in Scotland a few years ago. And it was, whatever it was, like a few thousand people died. And it was a battle that wasn't really even recorded anywhere. But thousands of people died on that battlefield. And it doesn't seem to have changed history one single bit. And that's a terror that a lot of people have. Is it true that I can be born, I can do so much, interact so much, have so many thoughts and hopes and feelings and interact with so many people, and yet at the end of all of it have it amount to nothing? Or even if it is something, to amount to just so little. So what do? We try to make it matter more. How? Well, you have children, pass them into the future. If you don't have children, you probably join some organizations of some kind. You start to support a sports team. You get behind a sports team because it joins you to other people like that. You join a political party and your life becomes politics because it joins you to those people. In other words, we try to take the solitary individualness of our own existence and we try to expand it out by multiplying ourselves in some way, through family, through business, and ultimately, we like the idea of building a building. And if you build a building, well, that's going to stay for a long time. I just saw that there's a hotel over, I guess a hotel casino over in Las Vegas, the Tropicana, I think it was, that just got knocked down. It was up for a long time. It was like one of the old mob hangouts from I think from the 30s and 40s or something like that. The building's a really old building. They've renovated it over the years, and yet it's gone. And isn't that interesting? We have cathedrals. We have cathedrals in Europe that stood for thousands of years. Well, 1,000 years. And yet our buildings today don't last very long at all. It's almost like we live in a disposable society where we buy food that's disposable, we buy furniture from IKEA that's only supposed to last a few years, it's disposable. And that's probably what has so many people today feeling alienated and isolated and alone and meaningless and purposeless, because we're not doing things that are permanent, that drive us into a future. And that's what causes us to wonder, is it even worthwhile? And that's got so many people saying, no, we shouldn't even have children then, because we're sending them out into a terrible world. But the world has always been terrible. We've always had plagues, we've always had wars, we've always had all the worst elements of humanity. But the world has also always been spectacular. And that we've also always had the most divine aspects of humanity. Compassion, kindness, love. And these things are always fighting it out. It's a constant and perpetual battle of good versus evil. And so the question becomes, what is it that you want to introduce into the world? Because you're here. You're already here. So the option to not be here, off the table. So now the question is, now that you're here, what is it that you're going to bring into the world? Is it something perpetual? Is it something that's just temporary and then erased? And it really is your choice. It really is your choice. But Can we survive death in terms of our physicality, our bodies? Probably not. Can we survive death in terms of our consciousness? In other words, can we put you into a different body later on? There are people working on that right now. And so I guess that is that question. What would you do with 1,000 years? I don't know. I wonder if, just like earlier I was talking about with having billions of dollars, would the money matter? Would the McLarens matter anymore? Probably not, because they're infinite. If your days were infinite, today probably wouldn't matter. But once you get your head around the idea that you've only got so much money, you're careful with how you spend it, and you appreciate the things you spend it on. I guess that's kind of the moral of that story, is to spend the days and invest the days in the things that really do matter, uplift you. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Friday-ish? Yeah. Could be worse. I could have told you the rest about